Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Have you ever been frustrated that your leadership efforts aren't delivering the results you expected? In this episode, Sean Glaze joins us to show us how to recognize when you're working on the wrong problem and how to uncover the real issues holding your team back. He shares a powerful process called the ladder of awareness, which helps leaders question assumptions, focus on the real challenges, and build a culture where values are lived and not just posted on a wall. If you want a practical tool to improve your team's performance, this conversation is for you. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Sean Glaze. Sean is a sought after leadership and workplace culture speaker who gained valuable insights on turning talent into teamwork as a successful basketball coach. Now he travels around the country to share those actionable lessons. Sean's engaging conference leadership keynotes and custom team building programs have helped clients like Cisco, Deere, the CDC, and Emory University to increase collaboration, boost productivity, and build sticky cultures that inspire more profitable teamwork. Sean's books, Rapid Teamwork, What Effective Leaders Do, The 10 Commandments of Winning Teammates, and Staying Coachable are entertaining parables that accelerate the growth of leaders and teams. And I'm excited to have him on the show to learn from his expertise. So, Sean, welcome to the show.
John, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to have a conversation with you around leadership.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. Especially you come from a sports background. I come from a military background. And I always see that there's some similarities in those kind of backgrounds. So I'm excited to kind of get into it and just see your perspective and what you learned through how your experiences. So let's dive into the book, What Effective Leaders Do. So let's talk about that book. You've written that as more of a story and less of like a leadership manual. You've written it more like a parable. Explain why you've done it that way.
Well, my background, as you mentioned, was as a high school literature teacher and basketball coach. As a literature teacher, you don't learn a whole lot about leadership, but as a basketball coach, you certainly do. And it was as a basketball coach that I had my first, kind of failure opportunity when I face planted the very first time that I got a head coaching job. And you realize, that talent is important. You can't win games without talent. Strategy is important. You got to have X's and O's and skill, kind of stuff. But I was missing that third piece. And the idea of culture is really, I think that we spend most of the last part of our lives helping to teach people what we ourselves missed early on. And so that idea of basketball being very much like business, because every business is in the talent acquisition business. Every business has strategy they invest in, but there are a number of businesses that struggle to have their talent implement their strategy because they don't give ample attention to their culture. And that's really what I've been able to do. And that's the reason I've written the books that I've written. And as you mentioned, the idea of them being stories goes back to me being a literature teacher and understanding how engaging stories are in terms of carrying insights and principles and values and takeaways. And I always wanted, when I started to decide to share keynotes at conferences with some of these takeaways that I had begun to kind of uncover through some of my training and workshops is how do you actually maintain the attention of the reader and then also give them that content. So hopefully the stories are entertaining enough that they carry the content, and the content is what people will walk away with and implement.
I really like that. I think that, one of the things that we want as authors is that people sort of find those ideas and take them away with them and not just sort of, read the book, put it down and never do anything from the book. And I think stories have a way of connecting us differently than say a manual or like, my books are not, they're nonfiction. And so I think there's some good that comes out of that. But I do think that stories, fictional stories, which you can explore different topics in a very unique and different way, can really, I think, sort of connect with a person more completely, and they're more likely to sort of take action on those items. Is that sort of your feeling as well?
Well, I think that, and again, this goes back to me being in a high school classroom with 35 teenagers and maintaining some type of order and engagement to make sure that they weren't on their phones or, touching the person next to them or being a knucklehead. And so, how do you do that? Well, again, it's, you need to make sure that there is some type of entertainment around, that engagement. And I think that education is always going to be, and when I work with teams and corporations, they're just older students. It's the exact same thing where you're teaching and sharing really vital and helpful information and tactics and insights that they can implement. It's just a different classroom. And the thing that I absolutely believe is the idea of, experiences are memorable. And if you can give them an experience in the midst of a training, that experience is going to be memorable and that's going to carry with it the nugget of the insight that they can apply. And it's the same way with stories. Stories are experiences that we can actually have through somebody else's, and that idea of that story being an experience that carries with it an insight or a tactic or a tool that they can then take away and apply is important. And I think, the thing that inspired me, honestly, John, and I think that there are certainly people who have been, mentors to you that don't even know that they were, reading Og Mandino, reading Bob Berg, reading, Pat Lencioni. Those are, kind of things that their stories carried some pretty popular and valuable and impactful content. And I've probably emulated them as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so in this book, you talk about this idea of ladder of awareness. So I think that's kind of an interesting concept. Tell us a little bit about the ladder of awareness and how does it help leaders from sort of solving the wrong problem, right? So a lot of leaders are trying to solve a problem, but maybe sometimes they're just trying to solve the wrong problem. So tell us a little bit about this concept.
Yeah, well, in what effective leaders do, and the reason I wrote the book is I realized that the team building and the teamwork and the culture and all the stuff that I had worked on with teams always going to be a symptom of leadership. Culture is always a symptom of leadership. And so I wanted to write basically what is a how-to manual that a new leader who is really, really doing well in their role as an individual contributor, once you're promoted to a leader, that's a very different set of skills. And I think that, hopefully through the story that I tell of this kind of emerging leader who needs to have somebody as a mentor, kind of walk them through what are those differences. The very first of the four lessons that are kind of shared in the midst of the story is that ladder of awareness that you mentioned. And I think that it is by far the most important because we all struggle with the ladder of awareness, regardless of industry or position. Even if we don't have a title by our name, the ladder of awareness starts with us being unaware. And in the
Mm,
story, I have the main character walk downstairs and she's dealing upstairs with, work stuff. But as she gets downstairs, she steps into, just a completely flooded first floor of her house. And she had had that flooded first floor for the entire night, but she didn't realize it. And I think that oftentimes as leaders, there's damage being done to our teams. There are issues that we're not addressing, and something is happening that we're not aware of. And that's the level we want to get past very quickly. And from unaware, I think that next step up the ladder of awareness is to go from unaware to then symptom aware. That's when you have the squish moment. That's when you realize here's the issue, here's the damage, here's something that's going wrong, here's an oh my goodness, I need to get somebody's help to make sure that this gets fixed type of moment. And as a leader, you probably don't go a week without having one of those where something happens that was unexpected. You go from unaware to here's a symptom that I need to address. The issue is, I think that sometimes leaders, and certainly I as a young leader, we address the symptom and we
mm.
don't understand that the symptom is always the result of something upstream that's the real problem, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that, as a young coach, I would respond to a player who was having a bad day and showed some type of emotion or was not as coachable as you like him to be. And I'm addressing that instead of getting curious and compassionate. I was commanding and, consequencing. And I was an unbelievably, difficult person probably to play for. And our teams did not do well, largely because I, as a leader, was not providing the culture and the leadership and
Mm,
those intentional interactions that would give them a chance to thrive in their roles. And so that ladder of awareness is something that wasn't just Jen walking into a leak in her home, but hopefully kind of analogous to the metaphor that every leader deals with in going from unaware to symptom aware to problem aware. And what I think most leaders find is as soon as you can identify what the real problem is, the solution becomes a whole lot easier to see and to implement. The issue is going from symptom to problem and really looking behind what's right in front of you as you maybe an urgent matter. And how can I actually take the time and be intentional about looking behind that symptom to find the problem and really fix the leak?
Yeah, I love that. When I read this, it sort of resonated really well with me in terms of when I was my first manufacturing plant. I was 32 years old, and I was given a plant in another, basically another state, and I was a senior person on site at 32 years old, and I remember thinking, oh, I've got this great job. I got to figure out how to run this factory, but I was clueless. I mean, as to what the challenges of that business were. I mean, I sort of like heard stories, and I talked to people before I went there, and I sort of had like some preconceived notions about what the problems were that I was facing. And what I realized very quickly is I was completely unaware of the challenges that existed. And so as I would walk the shop floor and talk to people, it was like a different stories I was hearing than what my assumptions were. And I began seeing some of the symptoms of the problem, right? But I didn't really know. It took me a while to figure out what the true problems were. So when I saw this structure, it made a lot of sense to me as a young as a young leader coming into that kind of environment. What's that top level? Once you're problem aware, what's is there a next step to that?
Well, I think problem necessarily leads to solution. And the reason that I started the book with that awareness ladder
Yeah,
is I do believe that awareness, and this is really the major premise of the entire story in the book, John, is, you know, leaders don't get better because of experience,
yeah.
right? We all have had leaders or people we work with who are the exact same person 20 years later, and they're not necessarily better. They've just been entrenched. And I think that what improves people is an experience, it's awareness. And when I talk with teams in the midst of a training of some kind, I'll talk about the cycle of culture. And what happens is, people will call me, we want to fix our culture. And we define culture when I talk with a client, when I talk with an audience. Culture is very simply the behaviors that are allowed and repeated in an organization. What are those behaviors? How do you do things? Those behaviors that are allowed and repeated become your culture. But as a young coach, I knew I needed to change our culture, and I would just address those behaviors. And if you've ever
Mm,
just addressed behaviors, you realize that consequences don't work long term, and that just addressing the behavior isn't always as effective as you'd like. And if I want to be effective instead of just efficient and continue to deal with symptoms, I needed to realize that behind those behaviors are always beliefs.
mm,
And people behave the way they do because they believed in that moment that that was the best thing according to their information and perspective. And when you go into a situation as a leader or a teammate and you realize that Bob's not, Bob is smart and capable and good. And when I raise my eyebrow at what I saw him do, it's because the belief he carried into that experience led him to that behavior. Well, our beliefs are always a result of our awareness. And the way I define awareness is it's what we notice in our experiences.
mm,
Because there are a lot of people, if I've got 600 people in an audience when I'm speaking, there's going to be 600 different versions as they walk out to have coffee of what that was because they're going to notice different things that are more relevant to them. The experience is the same, but their awareness is different because they notice different things. And so if I want to change a culture, I want to make sure I shift beliefs, and you do that by improving their awareness and helping them notice things in the midst of experiences. And so, whether it's a challenge or a story or an interaction of some kind, those experiences hopefully drive a different awareness and shift beliefs and then change culture. All that to say, I think that if we are aware of the fact that that is where culture resides in our teams and certainly in ourselves, is in the opportunity for us to be more aware first, and then to help our team members be more aware, not just of, what's impacting them, but of how their attitude and their actions are impacting others.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I know, some people's, as you were talking about, culture is like kind of this interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic that exists in businesses, and it's sort of like you said. It's sort of like the culmination of our beliefs and our actions, right? And how
Mhm.
we act towards each other. And what I see a lot of companies is that so we sort of put value statements out there. This is what we have like aspirational goals for our culture, right? But then our actions don't reflect that, and our leadership actions don't reflect that, or we tolerate behaviors that are not consistent with those values, right? And so when we do that, that whatever we accept, right, then becomes the culture of. So if we say in this company we're never going to be late to a meeting, right, but then people are late to meetings and nothing's ever done about it, right? You could say that your values are we're going to be punctual, but what the behaviors are and what the leader tolerates really becomes the culture. Isn't that from your observation the same thing?
100%. I think that culture again is the behaviors that are allowed and repeated. And I
Mm,
would tell my players and athletes, and I would tell leaders the same thing. If I'm in a room, what I say and what gets done, that's obviously going to be the influence, and leadership is the influence of my interaction with others. You can be a leader without a title or without authority. Leadership is the influence of an interaction. But when I leave the room, what occurs in the locker room when I'm gone as a coach, that's culture. That's what
mm,
they decide to do and behave like, and those actions and those activities, those behaviors. The players are just as responsible for the culture as I am. Although certainly I have a little bit more of an impact upon hopefully helping them to define those values. And I think that, to your point, the idea of culture, as soon as you've identified a goal and you understand why you're there and who's actually going to help you to achieve that goal, who you're climbing the mountain with, the single most important thing an organization can do is to define not just purpose, but what are those principles? What are those values that we're going to actually, live by? What are the guardrails that are going to keep us on the road? And I think that the issue that a number of organizations have, both athletic and corporate, are they'll put values on a website or on a post on a wall,
yeah.
and they're unbelievably and painfully vague, because what responsiveness means to you as a value may be something terribly different to me in terms of how I define it. And values, leaders need to understand values are only useful insofar as they've been defined by examples of behaviors.
Yeah.
What does that term look like in our offices? What does that term look like in interactions with customers? What does that term look like on the warehouse floor? And if you can give people specific examples of what that looks like, they have a much more clear goal of what success is for them and what's going to be rewarded.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, because I think it's these stories. So the stories become legends, right? In terms of like, when you take an action that's consistent with your values, and it's a big decision, right? Nobody ever everybody remembers that, and people talk about that. One of the things I always tell young leaders is, you just when you first come into a role, every eye is upon you, so you take advantage of that opportunity to make a big statement in some by an action that you do. And like, for one of the things I do when I come in, I ran 8 different manufacturing businesses in my corporate career. The first thing I do is I eliminate all of assigned parking spots. So I walk in the front door, I say, who's the maintenance manager? I say, come out here with some paint, and we're going to paint over all of the assigned parking spaces. And I do that on day one before I even meet anybody. And it becomes like legendary, oh, and I, because I say one of our values is that every person in this building is essential to our business. And that, but it's through my actions and through the story. Like it's like a legendary story of this crazy young plant manager comes in here and paints over all of the assigned parking spots. So I think by our actions, right, we sort of signal what's really important to us.
Absolutely. And I think that those actions, again, you think about the behaviors that people see.
Yeah.
Behaviors are always evidence of the beliefs behind them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you do that because the belief of we're all equally, valuable, and not every job is as visible, but every job is just as valuable. We're not going to have
Yeah.
different parking spots.
Yeah.
And I think that action, that behavior is absolutely the outgrowth of the belief you have that you want to make sure that you're infecting other employees and the rest of the team with. And I think similarly, the reason, and I know that This is something that you've not asked yet, but I think it is a perfect segue. The second lesson in the story is everything about questioning the assumptions that we make as leaders.
Mm.
Because if the ladder of awareness and the cycle of understanding what builds culture is the first kind of foundational idea, the second thing that I think every leader and even teammate, regardless of title, needs to understand is we all tell ourselves stories, and those beliefs need to be examined a little bit more thoughtfully. And some of those beliefs are the principles. What are the values that we're coming in with, and how do I do a better job of making sure that other people are telling themselves the same story about what our values mean as I'm telling myself. But specifically, I think that the stories that we tell ourselves as a leader, not just about our purpose or about our principles, but about the people we're interacting with, have a huge impact on our success.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, because I think one of the phrases we had in the military was expect what you inspect. And so it was the idea that get out and look at something. Don't just assume something is a way because someone told you that way. So it's always been in the back of my mind, like, get out to where the people are, listen to what the people are saying, and don't assume, because you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you have built on these assumptions of the way things are or the way people are. And I think, like, oh, Ben's always angry, and he's an angry individual. He's got, he's a hot tempered individual. You need to avoid him, type of thing. It's like when someone tells me that, I'm going to go talk to Ben. I'm going to go find out for myself. I don't want to just take somebody's, story or somebody's. And so I think part of that too is a little bit of humility, right? To say, I don't
Oh,
want to make an assumption here. I want to just be humble enough to go witness what I'm seeing and sort of make a judgment on my own, right?
well, I have kind of used the acronym for ego because ego was absolutely my downfall as a young coach, and I think that for most leaders, we want to go in and it's that ego that's telling us we gotta demonstrate to everybody that we know everything, right?
Right.
And if confidence is thinking you can help, arrogance is thinking you don't need help, and I
Right.
think that ego is eliminating growth opportunities because we tell ourselves we don't need to ask for help. We don't need to stay curious. We don't need to be compassionate. We don't need to make sure that we're asking those questions that allow us to shift our stories. And if we tell ourselves a story, then we oftentimes look for evidence to support our story instead of looking in the mirror to question the story itself.
Mm.
And I'm sure that I've had, interactions with athletes and players that I very much regret because I was telling myself a story that, oh, this player's lazy, oh, this player's irresponsible, instead of being curious enough and compassionate enough to ask questions about what's behind that symptom, right? What's
Yeah.
going on at home? What's going on with the classroom? What's going on with your girlfriend, with your that may lead to the behavior that I had put a label on that was completely inaccurate.
Yeah. I mean, wrong. I've had so many opportunities to fix where we had the wrong person in the wrong job. And when we got them in the right job, it was like, this is a whole different person. So sometimes it's like we put a square peg in a round hole, and we wonder why it's not, why that person's not performing to expectations, and they're not in a position that they're happy to be in, or they're not, they don't feel like they've been put on earth to do that job. They've been put in sales. They don't really like sales. They really prefer to be, behind the scenes as a quality inspector or something like that. But I mean, finding, being able to be, like you said, curious, humble, listen, sort of put assumptions aside and to say, okay, maybe it isn't the person. Maybe it's we've got a process issue here. We put somebody in the wrong role, and I found that to be the case in both the military and civilian world, where I had people in the wrong role. And once I fixed that, I ended up getting. I always tell the story of my worst sailor became my best sailor when I found out he was in the wrong role. And once I figured that out, it was like it was night and day for him.
And that starts with the curiosity and you being willing to ask a question instead of just assigning somebody, oh, that's just a bad fill in the blank and then
Yeah.
being written off.
Yeah. So you mentioned confidence, a kind of interesting thing. So you've got confidence, but then you've got like arrogance, and they're really close together. And so how do we, and I think it's important that we as leaders have confidence, we show confidence, but how do we balance confidence with humility to be able to listen and to be able to, so maybe talk us through a little bit about confidence, because that's a big theme in the book. So
It
talk a little bit
is.
about that and how do we balance this?
I actually end, and that is of the four kind of lessons that the wise mentor shares in the story. One is the ladder of awareness. Then you get to the questions that leaders need to uh, focus on and questioning their assumptions and beliefs. Then you talk about how leaders kind of evolve and where their priorities and focus are. But then I finish up, as you mentioned, with confidence. Because in coaching leaders and in talking with leaders at different events, one of the things that I've found is they can go home with a stack full of notes and things that they want to do or know that may be helpful, but then they hesitate to implement it because they don't have the confidence that they're going to be able to do it well. And I
Mm,
think that without confidence, without that willingness to navigate a challenge, the other information becomes worthless because, as you said, people will read books and say, I've just read that. And they'll have this bookcase full of books that they've read, but they've not implemented. And it's so
mm,
much more important to implement a couple of actions from something that's going to be valuable instead of just to say, I've completed reading something. And so the idea of confidence and the story that I'll tell is, when athletes I had would go into a game and would be confident in taking a shot. That confidence was always a souvenir of past success.
mm,
Any confidence you see is a souvenir of past success. It's you recognizing, yes, I've done this before and I've shown competence and sometimes even competence in adversity. And that gives me the belief that I'm going to be able to do it again because I've seen myself do it over and over first time. The issue is you'll hear some of the worst advice that is given to leaders and individuals is to fake it until you make it, right?
mm.
And I think that teams absolutely see it. They don't want you to fake anything. They want you to be authentic. They want you to be honest. They want to make sure that you acknowledge some of those things that I, as a young leader, was not willing to, because again, you put on that mask and you pretend that you know more than you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But I think that the best leaders, the most effective leaders, are those who are honest about, hey, we're going to try implementing so and so. This is the first time I'm doing, but I really think it's going to be important for us because blank, blank, and blank. Here are the steps we're going to take. And the very first time a leader tries one-on-one conversations, it's always awkward. But again, you do well what you do often. And the thing that I would tell young shooters when you're doing shooting camps, and the thing I would tell young leaders as you're starting whatever that implementation is you've got to be willing to be bad long enough to get better.
Mm,
You need
yeah.
to give yourself grace because your team will absolutely give you grace if they understand that what you're attempting is for them to be able to benefit. And so I think that rather than fake it till you make it, it's be willing to fail it till you nail it. Make sure that you grow it until you can show it, whatever that might be. You need to be willing, in those kind of four steps to confidence that I share are, you start with courage. You need to be willing to step into that discomfort and to acknowledge, here's an issue that we need to address. Even if I'm not comfortable, you need to have the courage to begin to step in. And then the very next thing you're going to realize is you're going to have some clarity after that discomfort of, what is that skill that I need to build? Because that courage and a little bit of failure is going to lead to the clarity of what I need to work on. And then that gives you the opportunity to then cultivate that skill. And you're going to get in the gym and work on that thing that you need to do. As a leader, you're going to identify, this is something I need to be better at. And cultivating, again, is that idea of getting practice in, of being willing to be bad long enough to get better. And that cultivation leads to competence. And you know, competence is the foundation of any confident action. So you're
Yeah.
going to be confident because you've demonstrated competence. And I think that it is absolutely okay for a leader to acknowledge, you know, I believe in our abilities to navigate this challenge, but then you build confidence by actually successfully doing so.
I love that. I mean, you summarize that so well. I know when I started my podcast, I thought, oh, I'm terrible at this. And then I went back and I listened to the number one podcast in the world, Joe Rogan. I listened to some of his early episodes. I'm like, he was terrible at this when he started.
Right.
So it's like, oh, okay, I see the way this is. It's as you said, fail it until you nail it. I love that expression. So the idea that you're going to make mistakes, but you need to start moving forward and start learning and start seeing where it's uncomfortable, see where it doesn't feel right. And then the more you do it, the more reps you get, the more you get better at it. And then the more you develop, as you say, competence, right? Based on all of your past actions. And then suddenly now you have confidence, right? Because you have built this high level of competence through repetition, through hard work, through, failing and making mistakes and learning from them and making those course corrections. But you never get it if you don't start moving forward and making those mistakes. If you fake it, then you're never going to get the chance to really truly learn, I think, right?
I think that your team members or whoever is watching you, because there's always eyes on you, right? In whatever position. I think they realize when somebody is faking something versus when they are sincerely making an attempt and acknowledging, hey, I'm not going to be perfect at this, but we're going to move forward together. And this is important because. And I think
Yeah.
that when you can frame things in that way and you are authentically caring because you want to serve and support the people you're responsible for, I think that they feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a line I used over a course of about 3 years. I said, give me a little grace. This is my first pandemic. So, so as we went through the pandemic together with my
Right.
company, I was like, just give me a little grace here. I've never been through one of these before. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to look, but here's what we're going to do. And I think that people understand and they get it when you're saying, look, I don't know how this is going to work out, but here's what my values are. Here's what I'm going to attempt to do,
Mhm.
but I don't know. There's some unknowns here.
And even for leaders who will oftentimes show grace for their team members,
Yeah.
doing the same thing for themselves is very
Yeah.
difficult. To look in
Mm.
the mirror and to give yourself permission to be imperfect. That's a hard thing oftentimes for leaders to do.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We're very critical of our own actions. So sometimes not very forgiving either. I love that. Well, Sean, this has been a great discussion. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Oh wow. Well, again, I am so grateful for the time with you and be able to share some with your audience, John. I think that just a reminder of the book and to have gotten the first copies in and for it to launch in June and to get that in the hands of leaders and so they can serve their teams is something I'm really excited about. I think the main takeaway is, as I mentioned, that leaders don't get better because of experience. It's that next step of what you're going to notice. How do you notice things? Well, there's three ways that you can improve your awareness. And that's obviously the key is how do I improve that awareness? And I think the three ways that leaders can focus on and be intentional about are first reflection. Do you take time at the end of each day to answer a few questions? What's 5 or 10 minutes in order to be that much more effective in terms of what went well, what could have gone better, what I want to make sure I'm grateful for, who do I need to talk with tomorrow? What are those things where I can reflect on my day? The second is, are you seeking feedback from people that can actually give you valuable perspective that you don't have? And choosing those people and asking one very powerful or useful question. Hey, what's one thing that I could do, over the next few weeks that would be really helpful for our team and help me to lead you guys better? And if you can ask one question and be very grateful, and again, all this is on the website that I'll share in a few minutes, but I think that reflection and feedback and then coaching are the three paths to improve awareness. And the most effective leaders take advantage of all three.
Fantastic. Such powerful advice. I really like it. I mean, again, it dovetails well with my experiences and throughout my career that these make so much sense. And so I'm so glad that you've written this book. I'm so glad you put it all in one place where leaders can kind of go and have one resource and sort of help them sort of navigate some of these some of these rough waters, especially as young leaders come into a new role and I think it's the best thing to do is to learn from the people that have been there before you and sort of don't make all the same mistakes we made. So a lot of these
You make
a
some
lot of
new
these
ones.
yeah, I mean a lot of these books are written from people who've made a lot of mistakes, and we're trying to put out wisdom for the next generation of leaders so they don't make the same mistakes. So this is a great resource for that. So my hat's off for you doing it. So Sean, how can people find out more about you, all your books, and your services?
I appreciate you asking. You can find me online at stickycultures.com, greatresultsteambuilding.com, obviously LinkedIn, just find me Sean Glaze. And specifically, John, whether it is I actually offer for participants at my events or in my conferences, if they go to toolboxstuff.com, is going to ask for name and email stuff to get access to all the resources. But when you get access to that kind of VIP page, there's over 50 downloadable handouts and activities. And resources available for leaders to be able to lead their team and create great cultures themselves.
Fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Sean's resources. And again, on this podcast, we love free stuff. We can get you access. We'll have the link here in the show notes where you can get all those downloadable content. And again, this is really helpful advice. This is really good, powerful information to help you become a better leader. So don't miss out. So get to the links in the show notes below. Follow, connect with Sean, go to his website, sign up for the toolboxstuff.com, right? Is that right? Yeah. So get on that and make sure you find that, because again, you need tools to help you succeed. Sean's been there. He's done that. He's written the book. And so take advantage of that and take advantage of free stuff. Especially in this economy, free stuff is great. So Sean, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for the work you're doing, and thanks for sharing all this information to our leaders today.
Grateful for the opportunity, John. Thank you so much. If I can be a resource for your audience, feel free to please reach out.
Well, thank you. Thanks again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.